Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 155, What I Wish I Knew as a Young Conductor with John C. Hughes. In this week's episode, I welcome conductor and choir director John Hughes to discuss the things we wish we had known when we were starting out as teachers and conductors. We discuss the cynicism that can sometimes develop over the years in many of us, as well as the loss of awe when hearing choral music, once we start to dissect it as professionals. But then we also talk about how to get that back. In one part of the conversation, we discuss the importance of separating achievement from self-worth, as well as the problem with expecting ourselves and our singers to be perfect, even when we do it unintentionally. We even get into the practical side of things regarding rehearsal planning, score marking, and other self-management strategies for young teachers and conductors. John also wrote a book about this, which we will talk about later in the episode, but I want to give you a little bit of a taste from the preface of that book. I would offer my younger self, full of ambition, hungry for success and respect, and willing to work hard, these gentle words and encourage him to take a breath or two. The no excuses approach may be effective, but it may end up making you miserable inside. Stick around for this conversation. I think you'll enjoy it. And if you're old like me, you will probably get a lot of reminiscing out of it, so stick around. I'm excited to tell you about Ludus.com, a new platform designed for the performing arts by people from the arts. With Ludus, you'll have access to a friendly, knowledgeable customer success team that's available when you need them. And the best part, there are no setup costs, contracts, or hidden fees. It's 100% free to your program, so why not give it a try and see how Ludus can help you streamline your operations and put the focus back on your passion for the arts. Choralosophy listeners can go to ludus.com/choralosophy for an upgrade for free to their marketing suite. It is my learned opinion that sightreadingfactory.com is the number one tool in music literacy instruction. It's not a curriculum, it's a tool, and you've got to have it. Your students need to have it, and more importantly, you need to enter Choralosophy when you check out. Every time you sign up for Sight Reading Factory, get yourself a discount, helps the show a lot. So head over to Sight Reading Factory in time for school to start and get signed up, and don't forget to put the code in at checkout and get 10% off. One of my favorite bits of incorrect advice that I got when starting this podcast was, and I quote, "Don't bother starting a Patreon. Choir directors are too cheap to support you financially in that way." I was told that. Obviously, that's not true. Nearly 160 listeners voluntarily, for a free show, chip in $3 or more every month to support the work that we're doing here at Choralosophy. Patreon page is what really, literally keeps this light on that is shining in front of me to make sure that I can continue to do the show forever. So head on over there. There are, of course, various levels that you can join. And at the producer or above level, we have Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, John Warner, Jonah Clixbull, Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Angie Schilling, Carlos, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Jared Hendricks, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. Head to patreon.com/Choralosophy and join the crowd. Okay, everybody, I am here with John Hughes, and we're going to be chatting this afternoon about some of the things that we wish that we had known when we were young conductors, advice for people just getting started in the field. And I'm excited about this because as somebody who teaches a lot of young people and kids that go into music education and various fields, it's a passion of mine. So John, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about you first. Who are you, and what kind of has led you to be doing what you're doing now?
Sure. So I know, it's funny that I'm talking about, things that I might have wanted to know when I was a younger conductor, because I still am kind of young. I've been out of college for almost 16 years now. So, I have a decade and a half of experience, but certainly a lot more to learn. I've had a really fulfilling career so far. I graduated college, taught high school choir for a couple of years, did a master's degree, taught again in the public schools, did my doctorate, and then for 6 years I taught at Ripon College in Wisconsin. And in 2020, right before the pandemic, really, I became the third music director of Chicago Master Singers, which is a really amazing group. And so left Wisconsin, moved back to the Chicago area where I'm originally from. And for the past 3 seasons, I've been the music director of Chicago Master Singers. And now I'm really kind of enjoying a freelance career, doing CMS, doing the Green Lake Festival of Music in Wisconsin, doing high school clinics and stuff like that. So it's been kind of a winding road, I would say. But it's also been really fulfilling to kind of follow my growth and finding ways to make that happen career wise.
Yeah, that's really interesting because yeah, I would say that your path through your career so far has been, it's not just from your story, just atypical. It's not the path that you kind of learn about or hear about when we're in undergrad. Is that fair?
Definitely. I think, it's really easy to feel like there's a blueprint, right? You go to college, you get a high school job, and then you can move your way up, and kind of in my mind, at least, the ideal was to teach at the college level. I'm not saying that's everyone's ideal, but for me, that was. But I think, that is the kind of tried and true blueprint. But I guess I've really come to see that it doesn't always have to be that way. I don't know anybody, or I know very few people who do what I do. And it's one of those things, it's like you can only be what you've seen before, right? And so it's like I feel like I'm kind of charting my own path in some ways. And it's not always easy, and it's not for the faint of heart. But for me, it's been really fulfilling to kind of go all in on being a freelance conductor.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I'm always a big fan of bucking the trend and kind of
yeah, it's been that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's tricky.
I think it's commendable. I think it just like the idea in general, and I don't think it has to necessarily be related just to choir people. It just the idea of kind of forging your own path. I've always admired that, like people who don't follow a recipe. I think that's a really cool thing, and I think in that vein, I should mention, and we should chat about briefly. You and I first met each other because you were one of those original OG choir podcasters. You had a podcast years ago called Choir Chat. Tell us that story briefly. What happened with that?
I think that was a really fun time to do, and I still kick around the idea, like maybe I should bring it back, but I don't know. I think I started that in 2015 as a second year professor at Ripon College in Wisconsin. And I think what I was really responding to was getting out of graduate school. In graduate school, you have all these great times to sit and talk about music with colleagues. And have you heard this piece, or do you know this composer? And just this kind of exchange of ideas all the time. And then all of a sudden I was out of grad school and teaching, and I felt like I missed that opportunity, right? To just nerd out. Right. And so I thought, why not start a podcast? At that time, it was still kind of a newer medium. And, it was fun because I got to meet all these amazing people and hear their stories and learn along with the audience. Right. And so that really just developed out of kind of me wanting to nerd out. And so it was a great experience. And I was lucky to have you on there. Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny because I can identify with that. Of course, I get to live that every week here. But at that time, when you asked me to come on the show, like you said, it was a newer thing. I did not listen to podcasts ever at that time when I came onto your show. And in fact, I got invited to do Ryan Guth's show, which his was kind of one of those OG podcasts. There weren't very many. Now I feel like every time I open my Facebook, there's a new choir podcast. Like there are tons of them out there.
Right.
It's an interesting thing how that's just grown, and I think by and large it's a good thing. But yeah, I went back to that because I know you've still got them online. I went back and listened to a little bit of our conversation from back then, and it was surreal.
Yeah, it is wild.
Yeah, especially now that I do this, like for a job, I kind of like listen back. I was horrified at my audio quality and, like all this kind of stuff that I just didn't know what I was doing back then.
Sure. Well, I didn't know what I was doing either. I think it is cool though. It's like it is a snapshot of the choral field from whatever 2015 to 2018 or whenever I stopped,
Mm-hmm.
um, you can hear really what the pulse of the time was, and it was a really fulfilling thing. And yeah, people, you can go to my website and hear all the episodes for free. And yeah, it was a really fulfilling project.
Yeah, that's
And
great. Well,
kudos to you for keeping it up. That weekly grind, man. It's so much. It's so much. So
it
good for
really
you.
is. It really is.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do a lot here on Choralosophy is provide professional development. In a lot of, I have a lot of young listeners that are starting out their career, and or people who are maybe band teachers who are switching over to choir, or they're kind of starting fresh, and they come to this show because of the resources that are
Mm-hmm.
provided here in those conversations. And so one of the reasons I thought it would be interesting to have a conversation with you is you're also passionate. You've recently written a book to try to get ideas about what young conductors need to know down
Mm-hmm.
on paper as a resource as well. And so let's first kind of jump in there of where that idea came from for you. Why did you become inspired to create a resource for young conductors?
Sure. Well, I actually have two books that I would really recommend to everyone. The first is Howard Swan's Conscience of a Profession, which, if you don't know this book, it's a little old. I think it came out in the 70s or maybe even earlier. But you can tell from my copy, it's falling apart. The leaves are, or the pages are falling apart. And I think this is an amazing resource to people to kind of understand both the technical parts of what we need to be doing as conductors, but also just like what you need to have in your heart to be successful in this field, which I think we don't talk enough about in our training programs. The other book that I really recommend is this, you can't really see it too well, but Creating the Special World by Weston Noble. Another just amazing thing about how to have purpose and grace in rehearsal. And so those two books really, I read them when I was coming out of college, and was really excited by them, but I don't think I was really ready to receive them at 22. And
Mm-hmm.
so now, like I said, now that I've been in the field 16 years, it's kind of like, well, you know, here's here's how I've grown and really kind of inwardly digested what some of these other authors were talking about. And so I wanted to write down in my own way some advice that I wish I had or had listened to when I was 22. I think I had heard it before. I don't think I'm saying anything brand new in my writing, but it's more like I want to express it in a way that maybe I would have heard better when I was
Yeah.
younger.
Let's
But I
talk
probably
about
would have
that.
ignored it.
Yeah, let's talk about
Yeah.
that. So let's talk about if I, because I have some ideas for my own young teaching career, but I'm interested in having you start by maybe explaining what was it about your early career that made it so that you weren't ready to absorb it, or do you have examples of things from your
Sure.
early career that maybe didn't go as well as you would have wanted, and had you had this little more mature John Angel on your shoulder
Right.
talking to you, how would it have gone better? That kind of thing.
I think, it's not my experience isn't uncommon, right? I think people come out of college, right, and get their first teaching job and really want to prove themselves, right, and show how much they've learned. And I think our field, in a way, kind of breeds this sense of competitiveness, right? Like, you audition for a lot of things, you don't get most of them, right? Even to this day, I could list dozens of jobs and programs that I haven't gotten into, right? Um, and so, like, there's always a sense of you've got to be better, right? And that's good, right? I mean, it should be. It is a tough field, and there are limited spots, and so it is competitive. I think where I misstepped as a younger conductor was thinking that the answer then was to show how tough I was, or how smart I was, or how prepared I was, right? How serious I can be, right? And in an attempt to show my worth or my value as a conductor. And I guess what I've really realized is not only does that hurt you, musically, right? You're not, when you're not authentic, you're not going to connect with your singers as well. But it also hurts you on the inside, right? I think there's a great, Brene Brown is an amazing author who I want to continue to read more of. But she has this metaphor of that at certain points in our lives, we put on armor to protect ourselves, right? That because as a young conductor, I wanted to protect myself against criticism or questioning, or is he really good enough? That kind of stuff. And the weight of that armor not only weighs you down, right? It makes it difficult to work, but it hurts you both from connecting with others and from being your authentic self, right? And so I think what I'm really trying to do in this short book, it's not super long, but it's to encourage people to see the forest through the trees and realize that choral music isn't about being the smartest, toughest, sharpest, fastest person. It's about connecting with others and sharing joy with them. And if you can be that authentic person, not only will the musical product that you produce be better, right? But also you will feel better on the inside too, right? So it's a win-win. So that's kind of where I'm going. I guess in terms of like specific examples, I think I just maybe took the advice of like, don't laugh until Christmas, right? Like that's an old joke for first year teachers, right? I kind of took that to heart, and it was just like all business all the time, let's get better. And it's like, some of that's good, but we got to kind of channel it in the right way.
Yeah, I can resonate with a lot of that. When I was first starting out, I remember I'm sure I've told this story on the show before, but the first year that I got out of graduate school, so I had my master's, went back into teaching at the high school level. I had been, teaching some grad courses and directing the undergrad choir at the college, and teaching some adjunct stuff, and I had all this highbrow things that I recently was able to add to my resume. I go back into the high school classroom, and of course my mistake was that I thought that would impress them.
Right. Yeah, they don't care.
They don't care at all. And it took me a while to realize that I wasn't going to be able to win them over in the same way that I won over college students, but who are paying for a degree, because in that context, yes, they did need a little bit more of my expertise, and they needed a little bit more of my knowledge. Whereas the kids at the high school level, they want to just know that I'm a real dude, who's there to get to know them and also connect with them. And I think it's a challenge for me though, because at the same time, I wouldn't say that my musical knowledge or my expertise and my ability to do the job musically was not relevant, because it was. And so I always caution people when we say it's like, well, it's just all about, feeling good on the inside, and can we connect with people, and all those things are good. We still have to like do our music work. Like we've got to be able to facilitate high quality rehearsals. But here's the thing, and I think this is where I want to see what you think about this. The more we've done our work as musicians, the easier it is to go into a rehearsal and not be stressed about those musical elements, so that we can connect with people, be ourselves, be our authentic self, and not be like staring white knuckled at a score. So you know what I mean? Like there's this 100%. Balance of it. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, 100%. I think one thing that I kind of always come back to is that we can take what we do seriously without taking ourselves seriously.
Ooh, that's good.
I right. Like so like, yep. I'm super type A. Like you should see my scores. They are color, I've got rulers and I got all this stuff, and I plan my rehearsals down to the minute. I'm like 8:49, do the 8, even now, right? I'm 16 years in. I plan it, and this is how I'm going to work this section. First, I'm going to do sopranos, and then I'm going to add the basses because they're really a duet. And then I'm going to do it, and I write it out every week, for what I'm doing. So I take that super seriously. And I know a lot of people might think like, whoa, that's over the top, or I could never, that's way too OCD. He's so type A, right? I'm guilty of all those things. But I think it's also like when I'm that planned and then I'm not stressed. And I know about myself, when I'm stressed, I'm not the best leader I can be. So for me to have that plan and to have really know the scores and know exactly what I want, then I have more freedom to actually listen and engage and what I call like play, right? Like that's what we're doing. We're playing music, we're singing music, and have this interchange about, oh, what about this? What about that? And experiment in rehearsal instead of going into kind of survival mode.
If your school or church are in the market for staging products like risers, shelves, podiums, movable platforms, all of the things that you need to set your choir up for success, I would like to strongly urge you to check out StageRight. StageRight's products are sturdy, they're durable, they're easy to use. I have personal experience with the acoustical shelves and some of the platforms that they have at StageRight, and I can tell you, compared to some of the more expensive competitors, they are a really great option to fit inside of a tight school budget, but also to give you the durability and usability that you need. So check out StageRight at stageright.com. Yeah. Yeah, I really like that distinction. And I think that's important because I kind of cringe sometimes. You see it a lot on Instagram and a lot on Facebook and, conductors talking about how really all it matters is that we connect with our singers and make long-lasting relationships and we teach them to love music. And all of those things are true, but I cringe a little bit because sometimes we leave out of the conversation how important it is that we are musically prepared so that a lot of those things can be facilitated. And I like that. I really like that distinction. So I'm going to say it again so that people don't forget. We're taking our work seriously. We're not taking ourselves seriously. And I think that I just love that. I appreciate that. That should go on a t-shirt.
Well, you got merch. There you go.
Yeah.
The other thing I talk a lot about in this book is this concept of hosting a rehearsal, right? So I talk about, like, my wife and I love to have people over at our house, and to be a good host, right, you have to set the table and think about what you're going to cook, or think about what music should be on, and light candle. Yeah, we do the whole thing, right? And so that when people come to our home, I want them to feel like, oh, he's thought about me. They anticipated my needs and anticipated what I like. And, I think like the way we would host my parents, who are in their 70s, might be very different than the way we would host our daughter's friends, right? But they both, even though they look different, they both require some forethought to do well. And so that's how I approach rehearsals, right? It's like, I want to have everything laid out for you. I want you to feel like I've been thinking about you, because I have been. And then that establishes that relationship that we do need with our singers, right? But it also signifies like, but we're here to work, right? We're here to sing. Like, that's why you're in choir, right? So let's get to that as soon as we can and make that as meaningful as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a copy of your book here in front of me, and I'm going to call out some chapter titles, and I just want to kind of pepper through the book and let you give some examples of things that jumped out at me when I was skimming through it. One of the chapters was called The Inner Child. Tell us about that. What's the importance of that inner child image?
I think I say in the book that, no one falls in love with choir because of a German augmented sixth chord and how it resolves outwardly. Right? Like, that's a great thing, or actually inwardly, right? That's a great thing to fall. I mean, I'm a theory nut. I love it. I do a harmonic analysis of every piece I conduct. I think it's really important. But that's not what made little Johnny Hughes fall in love with singing, right? Like, the power of singing comes from text, music, and people combining, right? And that's what hooks us. That's what gives us those goosebumps, right? And so I think it's really important to always remember, like, what is this actually about? Like, what are we feeding? And it's that inner child. And so that sense of play in rehearsal, what about this way? What about that way? That to me helps people recapture that. And I think just as a profession, I talk a little bit about when I was in high school, my brother went to St. Olaf College. He's older than me. I went up to visit him and I heard a very early concert of Cantus. I'll never forget it. I mean, I was just some kid who, like, I was not thinking about going into music. I just liked to sing in choir. And I heard them sing this beautiful arrangement of Danny Boy, and I was hooked, right? And I bought it and I listened to it on my Discman, which is dating myself a little bit, but it was like a really sincere reaction to that as a child, as a 15, 16-year-old kid. Compare that to going to a professional conference where, choir directors, we can be a little snobby sometimes, right? And these are amazing choirs, right? How do we get back to not being cynical about other choirs' performances and simply enjoy them the way we did when we were younger, right? So how can we shed that cynicism and instead embrace and allow ourselves to be moved again, right?
Yeah.
That's so important.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, and because I think getting a reflection of that concept in the minds of young professionals, of course, young teachers, young conductors, is really the only way that generationally, so to speak, that would be something that would get better over time, right? We, like some of the old dogs, we're not going to learn new tricks, although we can. But the biggest impact can be made in that next generation of teachers. I do appreciate that earlier in the episode when you were introducing yourself, you put yourself in the category of still young, which is wonderful because I'm 4 or 5 years older than you, so that way I can be young adjacent.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's good because as we all learn and grow, we look back on a lot of the things that you've laid out here in this book, and in some ways they become obvious to us, but at the same time they weren't obvious to us when we were young. That's the purpose of being young and foolish, so to speak. But the thing that you bring up here about the cynicism and some of the competitiveness that exists in our field, I think it comes from lots of places. Usually when I see it, though, I see it as coming from insecurity. When I was the worst about this, in other words, when I was guiltiest of this type of thinking about other people's choirs and other people's programs, etc., was when I was a young conductor and insecure.
Exactly.
So, and I'm less guilty of it now because now I'm able to appreciate a choir that, like, if you were going to be really technical and measure every note and measure every intonation and come out with a real cold calculating score, I might hear a choir that just isn't all that good, but I'm able to still find joy and appreciation in what they're doing because I might know that program had to overcome some huge hurdles just to get kids up on the stage.
Right. Yeah,
and
exactly.
I can find musical joy, even though it might be sometimes out of tune. I can put that aside and apply a different rubric when I listen to those choirs. I was less able to do that when I was young. It was all about, well, I guess they need to teach better.
Exactly. Yeah. And I going back to that Brene Brown metaphor of armor, right? It's like we put on this armor when we're younger, or I certainly did, of being kind of cynical or snobby or however you want to describe it about other groups, because I thought it made me look better.
Yes.
And instead it really made me look like a child. And also it made me miserable because then I was thinking like, well, what are people thinking about my choir? Right. And so then I was harder on my choirs because it's like, well, we're not going to be like them. Right. And then it's like, all of a sudden it was not fun anymore, and choir is supposed to be fun, right? Like we can learn and we can take what we do seriously, but not ourselves seriously. Right. So I think that's a huge part is like all that insecurity, and it really comes from fear. Right. And it takes a lot to like let down that armor and be authentic. Right. I think we've all had the experience maybe of conducting a piece that, it was just like everybody was in the moment, right? And it was so good. And there's silence after the piece and then applause, right? And you have these magical moments. And then sometimes I'll go back and listen to a recording of that. And it's like, oh, that wasn't as good as I thought it was. But in the moment, we were all in that moment. That doesn't negate that purity of that recording, which doesn't lie and maybe shows, oh, that chord was out of tune, or we missed that cutoff or whatever. That doesn't negate that moment was really magical for the people in the room. Mm-hmm. Right. And so how can we listen that way, with that kind of like rooting for other choirs to do well? And how can we create those experiences in our concerts for our audiences where they are, even if it's not like the 16 or whoever, that quality of performance? How do we create this experience for our audiences and for our singers that is like magical, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually, a lot of that is kind of part of my evolution too, of part of the reason I haven't submitted a recording of my choir to a convention since like 2012. And I'm going to get out of that rut and go ahead and put myself out there and the choir out there again. But at the same time, that's where a lot of that came from, is I just didn't enjoy the process of subjecting myself and my kids to the cynicism of other choir directors.
Right.
It took a lot of the joy out of it for me. And ultimately, a convention performance that my kids gave was wonderful. They did a great job, but at the same time, it was not as, it didn't feel worth an entire semester of preparation. You know what I mean?
Well, and I remember when I was I did that stuff, or like job applications where you have to record a rehearsal or whatever. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'd be in it and we'd do something, or I'd say something. I'm like, oh, there goes that whole rehearsal. There goes that tape, and I get mad because someone did something, and it's like, I was not fully present with my choir. I was thinking about this recording. Oh, now we can't use tonight or whatever. And it's really disingenuous to the actual process and to the people in front of you, right? Because you're no longer serving them, you're serving yourself and your ego, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can let that go and really focus on the people in front of you, I think you'll be happier, they'll be happier. And I really do think pragmatically the music will be better if you're fully present.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in the book, there are also, in addition to chapters, you have sections, which I found to be very helpful as I'm skimming through. The section 2 is called In Rehearsal, and you've got a little breakdown within the rehearsal. And one of the ones that jumped out at me there is when things go wrong in rehearsal. What does a young conductor need to know? Because it's going to happen, especially in that first year teaching. It'll happen a lot. What do we do, and how do we react when things go wrong in rehearsal? What are your thoughts?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, they will go wrong, right? And that was something that I had to learn, right? I thought if I plan and come in a good mood and I'm charismatic, like, we'll have a great rehearsal. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way, right? So things will go wrong. I think the first thing is to not kick the tires on a car, right? So like, that's not going to do anything. It's not the singer's fault, right? So that's maybe a hard thing to accept, especially if you come out of, like, if you're a fresh teacher right out of college and you've had this experience of singing in a really high level college choir, and now you're teaching. I don't know about you, but we didn't have too many hard rehearsals in college, like where things just fell apart or something. Like it was always, it felt like this kind of magical experience every day. And then you teach and you're like, oh, how do I create, what happened? It must be them, because when I was in choir, that didn't happen. It's like,
yeah. So
that's the first thing, not to assume that they're not working hard enough or don't care or whatever. The other thing I think is then to accept as a conductor that everything is your responsibility, right? So if something isn't going well, I always ask myself, how could I have done this better? How could I have introduced it better? How could I have taught it better? Maybe this piece isn't the right piece for them. And again, I think some of that comes back to our ego, right? Like, I think back to some of the pieces I programmed when I was teaching high school those first few years, and I was like, I wanted to do that piece because I sang it in college, right? Or in high school. It wasn't about what was right for them. It was about what I wanted to do, right? And so if we can remove our ego and think more about how we're teaching and why we're teaching, then we can minimize things going wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think of like when I was an undergrad, learning how to, like in a choral methods kind of a class, learning how to plan a rehearsal.
Mm.
In the absence of an actual choir made of human children or whatever,
Yeah.
or adults,
Yeah.
all of that was just in theory, right?
Right.
So I could sit down and write out the best rehearsal plan for how many minutes I'm going to spend on the first 17
Mm.
measures of the Mozart whatever, and
Yeah.
then and you could get a grade sometimes about based on whether or not your plan was coherent. But then of course you take any plan and you put it in front of actual people with needs, with emotions, with also a kind of hard to predict reaction to some of your instructions. You don't really know
Mm-hmm.
exactly if they're going to get it the first time. I think ultimately it's about being willing to create a plan, come prepared, but then also have the skill set to think on your feet and change the plan with no notice, and then still come up with something that works. Does that sound about right?
Definitely. I think all of what you're doing as a conductor is, first of all, in your planning, you're predicting where things could go wrong and anticipating solutions, right? But then a lot of what you do over time is you develop a bag of tricks, right? Of, okay, this is the issue, right? Here's 5 ways I can fix this, right? I'm going to try number one, try number two. But when you're starting out, you might only have one tool to fix a problem, right? And it might be the one that your college director used, right? Or whatever. So I think developing a tool belt is a big thing. And I give some ideas about, one thing I always do is like, there are 3 elements of choral music, right? There's the text, the rhythm, and the pitches, right? So it's like, if you could eliminate one of them, then, and just work on 2, then you're going to be better off. So if it's a really fast melismatic passage, maybe you take out the words and you just sing it on a neutral vowel in the pitches and rhythm, right? But you've eliminated the text, right? So there I make some suggestions about that, but I think the main thing that you need to do is develop a tool belt, right? And there's no shortcut to it. You just have to figure it out, figure out what
Yeah,
works, observe other people, right? That's a huge
trial and
thing.
error.
Yeah, go to conferences and go to the honor choirs and watch those people work, right? And see what they're doing, right? Get new tricks. Go sit in on a neighboring high school director. Go work with other people, right? And that's how you're going to get that bag of tricks.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I would caution folks, though, if you're going to watch the honor choir conductor, take it with a grain of salt, because then
Right,
you're going to come back to your quote unquote normal mortal children or kids or adults,
right.
and certain aspects. And I think this kind of goes back to the thing you said about the young conductor coming out of their college choir experience where everything was magical. That's kind of the honor choir experience too. Like
Right.
certain things are going to work simply because the singers are better. And in those types of scenarios, in college choir and or in an honor choir, sometimes the choir is good despite what the conductor's doing.
100%. Right.
You know,
And
no, I was
go
just going to
ahead.
say, and so sometimes we pull out that expectation from those mountaintop singing experiences. We bring them into our kids and especially I keep referring to kids in class in schools
Mm-hmm.
because in those situations, they just need to be taught how to sing. And
Right.
we want that choir experience to just like fall on them like manna from heaven.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think the other thing is, the other caution about watching other people work is like, I can't be like them,
Hmm.
right? I can take ideas from them and maybe an exercise or a warm up, but really what I am encouraging people to do is be the best version of yourself, right? And don't try and be whoever you want to think of, who you admire and idolize. That's good, but you aren't them and they aren't you either, right? So how can you I think what I've really done recently, and kind of how I've grown, and how I want to encourage other people to grow, and how I'm going to continue to grow, is figuring out kind of who I am, what's the best version of myself, and how can I highlight that and bring that to rehearsal consistently. And that's the trick, right? Because the very best people are truly themselves on the podium. They're not imitating, they're not some cheap knockoff of their teacher, right? They are themselves, right?
Yeah.
And it's, the hardest thing to be is yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Authenticity on the podium for a conductor, to me, is a reflection of a whole bunch of other things that have gone right in their preparation. I hinted at this before when I talked about the importance of musical preparation, but there's also a personal preparation that has to happen in order to be able to be in front of a large group of people, because ultimately, as conductors, our job is to be on display all the time. All of our, we know this because we all sang in choirs, and we notice the conductor's hair that day. We notice their outfit. We notice if they seem like they're in a good mood or a bad mood. We notice if if their personalities have changes from day to day. We make jokes about it. We love our conductors typically, but we're very focused on every little aspect of what they are doing and what they and how they are, because our job is to be in a fishbowl. And so when we stand up in front of these large numbers of people, all who have different ways of looking at us too, like we can't please one of them and we might piss the other one of them off.
Right.
That kind of thing. And so we have a tough job. And so I think the only way that it works, and this kind of amplifies what you just said a minute ago, is the only way that we can truly be successful on the podium is to figure out a way to be whatever authentic version of our conductor self that we can be. And that's not as easy as it sounds.
No, it's brutal. And, I think I like how you distinguish that it's our conductor selves.
Yeah.
Right. It's not, when I say I'm authentic on the podium, I'm showing like a caricature of myself to them that is attractive. Right. And it's not the same authenticity that I might show my wife when we're sitting watching Netflix at night. Right. Where it's like, okay, I'm in comfy clothes and we're just joking around and having a glass of wine and watching TV. Right. That's my family self. Right. But my conductor self, what I found is like, here are the attributes that I feel comfortable with and that choirs respond to. And I'm going to heighten those when I'm on the podium. And it is kind of a dog and pony show still, right? Like, it's not like inauthentic to highlight certain parts of your charisma to get a better musical product, right? But it is who I am, and it's not me trying to channel someone else who I'm not. So, yeah, I mean, I want people to be authentic, but I also want people to still be professional and have that, don't take authentic as meaning that you are who you would be at home or something.
Yeah, and it's authenticity that is appropriate to the situation, which is also just a grown-up skill. It's
right.
Not, it's not just that's not a choir director skill. That's just being an adult skill.
Right. We wear different hats at different times.
You can be yourself. You can be yourself at church, but that would usually maybe come with a different set of vocabulary than you might use if you're at the bar. And you can be yourself in both places, and they're both authentic. Just like my students at school see the authentic teacher version of me, which is also has a different vocabulary than I might use if I'm hanging out with my adult friends.
Of course, right, and that's good, right? I mean, I think that's healthy. I think sometimes we hear be authentic, and then we're like, well, I'm going to be the same with everybody. And you're like, that might not work, So, I encourage people to figure out what about you connects with singers or musician, whoever is in front of you, band, choir, orchestra, a group of people you're talking to, right? This isn't just choir. As you said, it's not just about choir, right? This is about how to be a good leader, right? And figuring out that and not wearing a mask of, I think, a lot of us wear the mask of our teachers, how we were taught. And it's like, well, you should take from that, obviously, but then integrate it into what you want to say, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes I think about like what are those aspects of our authentic selves that can transcend all those scenarios? Because it obviously can't be meaningless to say that we're ourselves in one situation, but then a different truly ourselves in another situation. So what are those things that can cross over the boundaries? So that my family self, my teacher self, my conductor self, my friends at the bar self, there
Mm-hmm.
might be aspects of that shows up in all those situations. And to me, those types of things that were hardest for me, and I want to see if you can reflect. This is kind of an on-the-spot question, but I'll give an example first. I know one of the things that was the hardest for me to show in all of those scenarios to my authentic self was just the being emotionally vulnerable.
Mm.
That was the hardest thing for me, and that partly has to do with whole aspects of my childhood that I don't want to go into. But once I figured out how to show that aspect of myself to my choirs,
Mm-hmm.
things really took off. And it doesn't mean I became like a weeping mess on the podium, but
Mm-hmm.
it did mean that I figured out a way to be enough authentically myself that when I was weak, I was able to show that I was weak.
Mm-hmm.
When I was sad or happy or all those different things that I kind of masked in my
Mm-hmm.
younger conducting years, I was able to bring those things out in an appropriate way that fed the choir and inspired them to also show their emotions in the music. Does that make sense at all as part of the
Um,
authenticity, or am I just rambling?
no, I think that's exactly right. And again, I think it comes back to that idea of fear or um, masking this armor of that's rooted in this insecurity, right?
Mm-hmm.
That
Yep.
and because I identify with that, I kind of always I was like in my 20s, I said I want to be beyond reproach, right? So I want every day I'm like just a wall and it's going to be the same, right? And we're going to just get better and better and better, right? And I'm going to leave all that at the door, right? And I think, I think to some extent, some of that is good, right? Like I always say to the choirs, like, I've got you for 2 hours, that math test you have to study for, whatever, you can't study for it now. So just enjoy being here, right? Like you're isolated from the world for these X number of minutes. Let's enjoy this. And you can leave the world outside, right? So I do think that that's a gift of music because it does require that presence. Um, but I share that, it's hard for us to be emotionally vulnerable sometimes, because I think we, again, fear weakness or being perceived as weak or as insecure or whatever. But I think that's the real strength of it is like sharing why do you like this piece of music? Why,
Mm-hmm.
like, what makes you, out of the thousands and thousands of pieces of music, why did you pick this one? Just,
Yeah.
and to be honest with them, I think that you don't have to have some like traumatic connection to every song, but to share, this is why I picked it, and I was thinking about you, and this is when I really want us to get this to the audience. That
Mm-hmm.
that is a point of strength. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Using the repertoire selection as an avenue, an excuse, so to speak, to open up those types of conversations can be really effective. I totally agree.
Yeah. I think,
Uh,
before when I was applying to college, I applied as an English major. I was not going to go into music. I was going to sing, and I was thinking maybe I'll do a minor, and then I had this kind of revelation, and like the summer before I started college and made the switch, and I haven't looked back. But one of the things I really loved about English class in high school was that it was the only class where we talked about life, right? You read a novel and you talk about, oh, what do you think about this? Right. And we can have that same experience in music, right? Because choral music has text, right? So you have all the benefits of those kind of like heartfelt, meaningful conversations that you had in English class, but you don't have to write any papers about it, right? So like, why not? That's the best part of music, is it allows us to experience emotion with other people in a healthy way. And
yeah.
there's repertoire that addresses every kind of emotion, and it's a safe way to feel it and experience it and share it with others. And so that's something I really approach with repertoire.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's awesome. Now, if we as we move kind of into the concerts part of the book, I'm interested
mm.
in just some thoughts for kind of a preview, so to speak, of what is the problem with perfect. You have a chapter with that title,
Right.
which I really like, and I'm interested in some thoughts there.
Sure. Well, I mean, I if you only care about doing the perfect performance, and that was in air quotes if you're listening, the perfect performance of Mozart's Requiem, you should not, because it's already on Spotify and iTunes, and like, why even do a concert, right? Because like, if you think about it, people are coming out of their homes, they're driving, they're getting a babysitter, whatever, they're doing all this stuff to come to your performance, right? If they only cared about hearing the very best Mozart Requiem, they could just stay home and not pay the money and whatever. But what instead, what I'm trying to do in my concerts is provide an experience, right? Of, not that Chicago Master Singers Mozart Requiem isn't worth coming to. It is, but it's not the 16 or whoever is on iTunes, and you have to remember that they recorded that in a way that made it perfect, right? They did multiple takes and all this other stuff. But the magic of live performance is that it's fluid, and it can change, right? And there's something so magical about experiencing something with hundreds of other people in the same room, right? And it's something that technology, AI cannot compete with. And I know a lot of people are worried about AI. I have to say, I am not worried about AI, because what we do with human connection is so much beyond the capability of that. And so we need to lean into that and worry more about how are we inspiring people instead of impressing them.
Yeah,
Because you're not going to impress them if you only care about it being perfect. Well, there are better recordings, So
right.
let go of that. Like, let go of your ego, let go of your armor, and just be with the people in front of you. But
Yeah.
that's taken me a long time to get there. And I'm not always there either. I have good days and bad days.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good story and a good point, because when an audience comes to see a piece,
Mm-hmm.
they're coming to hear their kids sing it, or
Right.
they're coming to hear their grandma or their
Right.
spouse or whatever. They want to hear the human that they care about engage in music, and they want to see them, and that kind of thing. And you're exactly right. I'm glad you brought up the AI thing. I was just listening to a podcast about that this morning, and the person the expert about AI that was talking specifically about will AI replace music, art, poetry, those types of things. Can it reasonably be assumed that the level of quality will be indistinguishable from human art making? And they were like, yeah, actually, it probably will be.
Mm-hmm.
However, the optimism came from this example, which I thought was really interesting. There is currently a Twitch channel. I'm not sure if you know what Twitch is, but it's like an app where people will just do live streams. That's
Right.
the entire app. There is currently a Twitch channel dedicated to the smartest AI chess playing computer playing against like the other smartest chess playing computer, and that's going because they never get tired. That's playing 24 hours a day. Okay, but hardly anybody watches it. Like at any given time, maybe like 150 people are on that Twitch stream. But if one of the greatest human chess players sets up their stream and starts playing against a computer or playing against another human, you got
Mm-hmm.
30,000 people
Right.
logging on right away. Because
Mm-hmm.
even though the computers are quote unquote better at chess than humans at this point,
Mm-hmm.
people still want to see a human.
Exactly.
Because we can, a lot of why we watch each other do stuff, whether it be sports or music or whatever, is because we can see a little bit of ourselves in that human expression. And
Mm-hmm.
you're dead on, because I don't think that we're, at least in our lifetimes, we're going to see humans care whether or not an AI tenor is singing beautifully.
Right.
You
That's
know?
not it. And it's like the beauty actually comes from the imperfection.
Yeah.
Right? It's not, we've all heard things that sound so fake, and it's like, it's not natural. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I think your resource here that you've created is really good. Just the way it lays out everything, and also has we're not going to have time to get to all the appendixes and resources you put in there, but I do want to give you a chance to kind of explain what is the back half of the book for. Like, you created what seems like not as much of a narrative prose type of a section of the book, but actual appendixes and resources on stuff. Tell us about that.
Right. So the 4 sections of the book are mindset, which is, kind of like the philosophical approach that we're talking about. And then the next 2 sections, in rehearsal and in concert, are how is that applied? And then the 4th section is very brief, and it's how to build a career without losing yourself. Right. And we kind of talked about allowing it to unfold naturally. The appendixes are really coming out of the second section, in rehearsal. And these are examples of things that I use in my planning to be a good host of rehearsal. So rehearsal planning templates, dress rehearsal templates, how to plan a sequence, right? And I give an example from actually my upcoming fall concerts with Chicago Master Singers of how this looks like for me. And they're available. You can download them from my website. They're in the book, and then you can download them in editable formats from my website and take them, improve on them, make them yours. Obviously, everybody's not doing the same repertoire as me, in the fall. So, like, I just wanted to say, like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? Here's a starting place, at least, for how to be maybe a little bit more intentional in your planning, because I think that's where, like you said, when we plan really well and have done our homework, that's the opportunity for freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really great. Now, where can we find it? How do we get the book?
So it's available on Apple Books. It's called Letters to a Young Conductor, Thoughts on Music and Life by John C. Hughes. You can download it. It's, I don't know, less than $10. And it has lots of resources in it. You can also go to my website, johnchughes.com, and you'll find a link to it there. It is available only on Apple Books, so you do have to have an iOS system to purchase it. But if that's an issue, you can reach out to me, and we'll help you out.
Yeah, that's great. I'll put a link to not only the Apple Books in the show notes, but I'll put a link to your website as well.
Awesome.
And that way, if somebody wants to go back and hear us talk to each other back in like 2017 or whatever it was, then they can do that as well. Well, cool. John, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This is a really great conversation, and I hope it will help a generation of younger musicians do better than we did. How about that?
I hope so. Yeah, learn from my mistakes. Well, thanks, Chris, for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, as always, for sticking around to listen to the end of an episode. I really appreciate those of you diehards that listen all the way through. On the way out, don't forget there are really important ways to help the Choralosophy podcast. 1, use the promo code at all the websites that allow you to do that. And of course, you can find those websites always linked in the show notes for every episode you listen to. So then you can click on those links, you can go to those websites and shop at great companies, and then enter Choralosophy at checkout to get you and your program a discount. And of course, go to patreon.com/Choralosophy and join there for as little as $3 a month. That is probably the most helpful thing that you can do because it contributes directly to the show. And last but not least, even if you can't do either of those things, share, comment, be part of the conversation. That is the mission of this show, is to create better conversation havers within the education and choral music sphere. So be a part of the conversation. Don't be a wallflower. We'll see you next time.